Hello, everyone, and welcome back. We are so pleased to welcome Anjali Mehta, and she is a human rights lawyer and the founder and director of What is the Power of We? Anjali, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. We had been climbing by the light of our headlamps and the brightness of the full moon for about 2 hours when we stepped over the ridge onto the dark side of the mountain. This was the side of the mountain we hadn't been able to see from our high camp, nearly 6,000 meters high. They called this part the Traverse, and it was a name that had tricked me into thinking it would be flat and it would be easy. It wasn't. The moment we crossed that ridge, everything changed. The stillness of the night, the quiet taps of ice axes, the soft crunch of boots in snow, the patchwork of stars, all of it vanished in an instant. The wind roared to life, hitting us sideways. It trapped us from the right, pinning us against the face of the mountain like a freezer door. Our lead guide, who had climbed the 14 highest mountains in the world, turned and yelled back through the wind, "We're gonna do this how we did it on K2." We stopped. I had started to shiver. He shouted again, "We're gonna run 10 steps, then stop, turn our backs to the wind, and get as close to the person in front of you and behind you as possible. Share warmth. Stay for 10 seconds, and then run again." I looked down at my hands at this point. They felt strange, numb. I shook them by my sides to make sure the blood was still flowing. Shake, make a fist, released. Shake, make a fist, release. "Stick with me," he yelled. "Go!" So we went. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Huddle. Breathe in the warmth of the people pressed against me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Huddle again. I forgot about everything else. The cold, the altitude, the distance left to go. All I could think about was the next 10 steps, the next breath, the next person beside me. After what felt like forever, we finally found a boulder to huddle behind. One of our guides, Ale, walked up and down the line with a bottle of half-frozen Coca-Cola, offering sips. I tried to unzip my summit suit to get my heavier gloves, but my fingers, they were numb and they wouldn't cooperate. "Ale," I croaked. "My fingers are numb. Help. Heavy gloves." He put down the Coke, unzipped my jacket, and carefully worked my hands into the heavy-duty gloves. I remembered the Japanese climber we had seen descending the day before. His hands had been blackened from frostbite, wrapped in 2 plastic bags, and I felt a jolt of fear. Would that be me next? "Keep your fingers moving," Ale said. "Keep the blood flowing." 13 hours later, after we had summited and returned to base camp, I finally took those gloves off. The tips of 2 fingers were pale, an early sign of frostbite that would take 6 months to heal. But without Ale, without our lead guide, without the warmth of my neighbors on that traverse, I probably would have lost them. And maybe I would have lost something bigger too. The reminder that we are not meant to climb alone. That night, I learned something I didn't expect to learn on a mountain. It's that fear is not failure. Fear is information. It tells you what matters. It points to where you still want to live, to lead, to try. And we tend to think that courage means getting rid of fear. But the truth is that courage only exists because of fear. And when it comes to leadership, it isn't defined by who stands in front, but by who we become when we face fear together. That night crystallized something that would shape everything in my life that followed. To move forward as climbers, as leaders, as human beings, we have to step into fear not around it. And every time we choose to step into fear, we unlock something new. First, vulnerability, the willingness to be seen. Then, courage, the decision to act anyway. And finally, connection, the understanding that we never climb alone. On the mountain, fear came from the wind, something I could see, hear, feel, brace against. But off the mountain, for me, fear looked different. It was quieter, it was heavier, and it was far more personal. Because the truth is, it's one thing to face fear in the freezing night of a summit night on the side of a mountain, looking over a cliff. It's another to face fear when it's inside you. Brené Brown writes that the idea of vulnerability as weakness simply crumbles under the weight of data and people's lived experiences. And yet, there is nothing scarier than laying yourself bare for someone else to see. That's why it took me 7 months to tell anyone about what happened to me. 7 months of silence. 7 months of pretending I was fine. The morning after my assault, I wrapped a scarf around my neck to hide its bruises, then climbed onto the back of the scooter behind the man who had caused them so he could drive us both to the performing arts school where we worked. That scarf became my promise. You'll be safe if you are hidden. So I hid. I poured myself into work, into bottles of wine that my foreigner status in Gujarat, India allowed me to buy. I tried to disappear in plain sight. But the more I hid, the smaller I became. My shoulders curled forward, my voice got quieter. I couldn't look at myself in the mirror. At night, when I loosened that scarf, I would ache, not for revenge, but for recognition. I just wanted someone to look at me, to see me, and to say, I see you. I believe you. It wasn't your fault. 7 months later, walking in Copacabana, Brazil, with my cousin, my big brother in spirit, the words spilled out, the story spilled out before I could stop them. And 7 months later, he stopped, he turned to me and said softly, I believe you, and I'm so sorry. That was it. 7 months of silence broken by one sentence. And for the first time, my jaw unclenched, my shoulders lifted, and I could finally drop the scarf. That moment, that tiny act of being seen, was the first crack of light for me after a very long night. It didn't erase the pain, but it reminded me that vulnerability, as terrifying as it is the birthplace of healing, connection, and truth. The moment people see you as human, they start believing that they can be human too. They let go of performing perfection. They allow themselves to make mistakes. And in doing so, they give themselves the freedom to get creative, to try innovative solutions, and to iterate and tinker outside of the lines. And that's what makes transformation possible. Fear had told me, you'll be safe if you are hidden. Vulnerability whispered, you'll be free when you are seen. So I ask you, where are you still wearing your scarf? Where are you telling yourself that safety and silence are the same thing? Because maybe, just maybe, that's the exact place where freedom is waiting to begin. Vulnerability cracked me open. But once you open, fear doesn't go away. It doesn't vanish. It just changes shape. It comes back as the question, now what? Because it's one thing to tell the truth. It's another to live by it. Long before I ever stood on a mountain, I learned how to face fear in a different arena, the boxing ring. I was 7 years old, awkward and shy and terrified of being hit. The first time I ever sparred, I kept moving backwards, back and back and back, until I stepped out of bounds and my sensei had to pull me back into the ring. And it was over and over and over again. I was so afraid of getting hit that all I could do was keep moving backward. If it were up to me, I'd never have gone back. Unfortunately, my parents were really, really, really gung-ho on the idea of me continuing to go and continuing to spar and continuing to fight. So I kept showing up. First, I learned to move in circles instead of just backwards. Instead of stepping out of bounds, I could move in circles. Then I learned to evade, to slip, to duck, and to counter, to jab. Eventually, I discovered that stepping in was safer than stepping away. The fear never left. The pit in my stomach, every time I stepped into a sparring ring, never left, but its meaning did. Every time I stepped forward, every time I stepped in, I was teaching my body a new lesson. Fear means go. As leaders, we face our own versions of that ring every day. Hard conversations, uncertain decisions, the risk of failure. Courage isn't the absence of that fear. It's choosing to step in instead of step away. Years later, when I began climbing, I found that courage on the mountains works the same way. On Everest, climbers face what's called the Khumbu Icefall. It's a glacier that moves 3 to 4 feet every day. And what that means is that it's a maze of shifting crevasses and overhanging ice towers called seracs that changes every time you cross it. You cross it on ladders, tied together with rope, listening to the mountain groan and literally move beneath you. And climbers don't just cross it once. They cross it 6 times. Twice to acclimatize, twice to return to base camp, twice on the summit push. Every time the route has changed. Every time the risk is the same. Courage is a little bit like that. It's not a finish line. It's not a one and done. It's a landscape you move through again and again. Choosing courage feels a lot like crossing the Khumbu Icefall. It doesn't get easier. It just becomes more familiar. And the transformation is worth the risk. When I left my law firm job, that was my icefall. I had a comfortable life, a clear path as a human rights lawyer at a big law firm, and a quiet pit in my stomach that said, "You are betraying yourself." And so I walked into a partner's office one afternoon. My heart was pounding, pit in my stomach was there, and I told her I wanted to leave to build something new. I told her that instead of being in a corporate law firm setting, working on human rights, but so disconnected from the people whose rights are being violated, I wanted to work with advocates. I wanted to work on the front line. I wanted to work with survivors, to listen and to respond, and to be an architecture to connect. She stood up, she hugged me, and she said, "I was surprised when you walked in, but this just makes sense." Courage doesn't always sound like roaring. Sometimes, as it did for me there, it sounds like relief. And I realize now my courage isn't mine alone. It's an echo of my grandfather who marched beside Gandhi, of my grandparents crossing oceans with 2 toddlers and a suitcase and 4 pounds in their pocket, of my parents starting over in a new country. Every act of bravery by my ancestors lay a ladder across a crevasse for me. Every act of bravery lays a ladder across a crevasse for someone else. Our courage is both individual and inherited. Every time we step forward, we make it safer for someone else too. And that's how courageous leadership becomes collective leadership. So maybe the question isn't, how do I stop being afraid? Maybe it's, which ice fall am I willing to cross again and again because what's on the other side matters more than my fear? Maybe it's, how do I step into fear? That's courage, not being fearless, being faithful. So vulnerability cracks us open. Courage lets us act in alignment with how we are and who we are. But connection is what keeps us standing once cracks appear. Because you can't be vulnerable alone, and you can't sustain courage in isolation. Every real act of bravery, every honest act of truth-telling depends on someone else being willing to hold the rope. The first time I told my story, I expected rejection. What I received was, I believe you. That was vulnerability meeting connection. One person daring to speak, another daring to listen. When I left the law firm and my colleague hugged me instead of questioning me, that was courage meeting connection. The moment someone said, "You are not alone in this climb." Connection doesn't erase fear. It transforms it. It turns my fear into our fortitude. I saw that again on Aconcagua. At High Camp, just before we had left for that summit traverse, I was unpacking all of my gear. I was getting ready for our summit bid, trying to put myself in a positive headspace after seeing that Japanese climber descending with frostbite. And I was really focused and I was really concentrated, and the silence of camp was disrupted by a scream. I ran outside of my tent, dropped everything, ran outside of the tent to see a woman on the ground, her guide standing over her with an ice axe raised. They had gotten into some sort of altercation, and he had hit her with an ice axe. She was on the ground, protecting herself, shielding herself with her hands, sobbing. We froze. And then we moved. One of our guides ran over to separate the two of them. Another immediately radioed the National Park Service. Another reached out to the woman to make sure she was okay. Our fear was still there, but it became collective. Action instead of paralysis. That moment reminded me, our liberation is bound together. Safety is a shared responsibility. That moment reminded me that even on mountains, where we think that we are leaving behind society, that we are spending time with ourselves in isolation, the mountain is just another reflection of society, of the world that we live in. The problems of society, like gender-based violence, don't go away just because we are on a mountain. That's why I founded What is the Power of We and its campaign, Survivors to Summits, to make that invisible rope visible. Through the Survivors to Summits campaign, I am climbing the highest mountain on each continent to carry survivor stories to the world's highest peaks, to amplify the voices and power of survivors of gender-based violence. And along the way, I am mobilizing survivors, advocates, and organizations worldwide to harness collective action against gender-based violence. Every story told is vulnerability. Every story heard is courage. Every climb together is connection. Ultimately, through Survivors to Summits, we will build a collective of organizations, of advocates, of individuals, and bring them together into a global digital hub. The first ever digital platform that is safe, secure, and provides a means for people to connect with each other in real time all the time, to capacity build together, to share stories together. Stories of hardship, yes, and stories of success. To share resources, funding opportunities, events, to respond to crises together. On a mountain, the connection and the collective effort it takes to get up to the summit, it's literal. The rope that connects us to each other is literal. When one person slips, the other people on your team need to dig in their crampons and hold that person so that they don't fall, and so the rest of us don't fall alongside. In life, that rope exists too. It's trust, empathy, allyship, shared responsibility. In leadership, it's transparency, shared purpose, accountability, the things that let us move through uncertainty without losing each other. Vulnerability ties that first knot. Here I am. Courage pulls it tight. I'm still here. And connection keeps it from unraveling. We're here together. That's how movements form. That's how change endures. So who holds your rope? Who is your climbing team? Whose weight can you carry? Because leadership at its core is a series of invisible ropes, tiny acts of trust that turn a group of individuals into a team into a movement, and a movement into change. When vulnerability opens the door and courage walks through it, connection holds it open for the next person. It's how leadership becomes legacy. It's how we keep climbing in the face of fear, even when the wind howls. When climbers finally reach the summit, it isn't the view that takes your breath away. It's the memory of every step that brought you there and the faces beside you that made it possible. On Aconcagua, there were moments where the summit felt impossibly far away, for me and for others. I remember looking up at what felt like a 90-degree wall of boulders and wondering if the summit was even real. And that's when Wendy, this incredible human, recentered me. She held my shoulder and she said, "One step at a time, we'll get there." And then moments later, Heidi, who's in front of me, turns to climb, looks up, probably thinking the exact same thing I was, and literally falls backwards into my arms. And I catch her. And I tell her exactly what Wendy told me. One step at a time. We're going to get there. The summit isn't a reward. It's a reminder that the climb was never meant to be done alone. Vulnerability, courage, connection. Each of them is an act of stepping into fear. Vulnerability says, I'm willing to be seen. Courage says, I'm willing to act. Connection says, we'll do this together. Together, vulnerability, courage, and connection create what I call radical transformation. The kind of transformation that changes not just individuals, but systems of injustice that we spend our time as human rights lawyers fighting against. Systems of patriarchy, systems of power. Because when one person dares to speak, others find their voice. When one person steps forward in courage, others follow. And when those people link arms, the mountain moves. I think back to that night on the traverse. 10 steps, huddle. 10 steps, huddle. 10 steps, huddle. That rhythm is what change looks like. It's not a sprint to the top. It's a series of small, brave steps taken together. Speak, act, connect, repeat. Speak, act, connect, repeat. Speak, act, connect, repeat. That's how fear becomes fuel. That's how vulnerability becomes vision. That's how courage becomes collective. So as I close, I want to leave you with 3 invitations. Lead with vulnerability. 1, let people see you as human first. It's where trust begins. 2, choose courage again and again. The fear doesn't go away, but every time you step in, it shifts. It becomes purpose. And 3, hold the rope. Reach for someone else. Create safety not by removing fear, but by being the reason someone else feels brave enough to climb. Because the reality is, fear never fully disappears. The ice ball never stops shifting. The wind never really goes quiet. But that's not the point. The point is that we keep crossing anyway, because what's on the other side is worth it. And we don't cross alone. When vulnerability opens the door, courage walks through it, and connection holds it open, we create a world where no one climbs in silence, where every summit reached lifts another person higher, and where I becomes we. So next time you feel that pit of fear in your stomach, the voice that says, not yet, not ready, not enough, remember, that's your ice ball calling. And maybe it's your turn to cross. Because we aren't meant to climb alone, and the world is waiting for what we can do when we climb together. Thank you.
Wow. Wow. I mean, one of the things that those big crevasses in the ice are so incredibly terrifying, right? Like, and what a story. And the fact that guide was ready to just hit her with a pickaxe. I mean, really, what was so important that they're ready to be that violent? That's
Yeah, well, what I did find out later is that the 2 of them were in a relationship, and so it was an example of intimate partner violence manifesting on the mountain in this very high stakes environment. And we look at the statistics as well of violence against women in the outdoors, and the power dynamics and the isolation that's is all exacerbated in outdoor situations where there's a lack of connection to internet. There is generally not too many people around, so in isolation, and it's difficult to kind of collect and preserve evidence and things as well.
right. Yeah, when there's no one, when you're outside and there's no one around, it's almost as if you're inside your home.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, having been a survivor, or am a survivor of domestic violence, I know that there were instances when we were out in public or out somewhere, but no one around. And you could actually see him like looking around. Is anyone watching? Okay, I'm going to take this action. Do something. Yeah, it's wild. But what an experience. That is amazing. That is truly amazing. And thank you for the work that you do. And thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, truly.
We will be back at the top of the hour. Let's see, where are we going from here? We have Where's my list? I don't know. I lost my list. We'll be back at the top of the hour. Stay tuned.